The plane had barely leveled off at cruising altitude on the non-stop from Chicago to Los Angeles when the trouble started. Derek, a thick-set salesman in the middle seat, leaned across the armrest and fixed his glare on Vincent, the quiet cardiologist in the window seat, his voice loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "So what are you two, supposed to be a couple boyfriends or something?" He sneered, his lip curling as he noticed Vincent and his partner Ezekiel sitting side by side, their fingers brushing in what they thought was a private gesture of comfort. Vincent felt the heat rise in his cheeks, the old familiar knot of shame tightening in his gut, but he kept his eyes on the magazine in his lap, willing the moment to pass. Ezekiel squeezed his hand, once a silent reminder that they had faced worse, but the words kept coming. Derek laughing now, as if he had discovered the funniest joke on the flight. "You guys think this is normal?" he asked, turning to the woman across the aisle who shifted uncomfortably. "Back in my day, real men didn't hold hands like that on a plane full of families." Vincent swallowed hard, his mind flashing to his conservative parents back in Texas, who still sent holiday cards addressed only to him, never mentioning Ezekiel, the man he had loved for 4 years. He wanted to snap back to defend the life they had built in Los Angeles, where he saved lives every shift in the ER. But the word stuck because part of him still wondered if Derek was right, that some people would never accept them no matter how hard they tried. Ezekiel leaned forward, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Sir, we are just trying to get to our destination like everyone else," he said, meeting Derek's eyes directly. Derek snorted and waved a hand. "Whatever, just keep your lifestyle to yourself before you make the rest of us sick." The cabin grew quieter, a few passengers exchanging glances, but no one spoke up, the silence heavy with the weight of unspoken discomfort. Vincent stared out the window at the clouds below, his thoughts racing through the years of family dinners where his father, a retired pastor, would quote scripture, and his mother would change the subject whenever his personal life came up. He had chosen medicine to help people, to prove his worth, but moments like this reminded him that his identity was still a battle he fought daily. Ezekiel rubbed his thumb across Vincent's knuckles, a small gesture that grounded him, but the tension lingered. Then, without warning, a cry came from the row behind him, Derek's 10-year-old son clutching his chest, his face turning pale as he gasped for air. "Dad, it hurts," the boy wheezed, his small body convulsing. Derek froze, his mocking grin vanishing as panic set in. "Someone help my son," he shouted, his voice cracking for the first time. Vincent was already moving, unbuckling his seatbelt and pushing past Derek, his doctor instincts kicking in before conscious thought. "Let me through," he said, his tone shifting to the authoritative calm he used in the ER. The flight attendant rushed over, but Vincent was already kneeling beside the boy, checking his pulse and listening to the labored breathing. "It's an acute arrhythmia," he announced loud enough for the crew to hear. "I need the medical kit now," and clear space around him. Derek stared at him, eyes wide with shock. You are a doctor," he stammered, his earlier taunts forgotten in the face of his son's distress. Vincent didn't waste time answering. He worked methodically, directing the attendant to administer oxygen, while he performed chest compressions, counting out the rhythm, his hands steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. Ezekiel stood behind him, ready to assist, his presence the quiet anchor amid the chaos. Passengers watched in stunned silence, some standing to give more room, the cabin transforming from a space of judgment to one of urgent focus. The boy's color began to return after several tense minutes, and Vincent finally sat back, wiping sweat from his brow as the captain announced over the intercom that Dr. Vincent had stabilized the young passenger, and they were diverting to the nearest airport for medical transfer. Derek knelt beside his son, tears streaming down his face, his hand reaching out to touch Vincent's arm. "I don't know what to say," he whispered, his voice breaking completely. Vincent met his eyes levelly, the weight of the moment settling between them. "You don't have to say anything, just be there for your son," he replied, the words carrying the quiet strength of someone who had paid dearly for his own compassion. The plane began its descent, the cabin filled with a new kind of silence, one laced with respect, as passengers murmured among themselves, realizing the man they had heard mocked was the hero who had just saved a child's life. Ezekiel placed a hand on Vincent's shoulder, his touch conveying everything words could not, the shared pride, the lingering hurt, the unbreakable bond that had carried them through so many storms. As the wheels touched down in Los Angeles, the applause started slow at first, then swelling until the entire cabin was on its feet, clapping for the man who had turned mockery into a moment of humanity. Vincent stood slowly, his legs shaky from the adrenaline, his eyes finding Ezekiel's in the crowd, the first real smile of the flight breaking across his face. The terminal at LAX buzzed with the usual chaos of arrivals, but the energy around Vincent and Ezekiel felt different, charged with the aftershocks of what had happened 30,000 feet above. Passengers from their flight lingered near the gate, some approaching Vincent to shake his hand or offer quiet words of thanks. The same people who had stayed silent during Derek's taunts now eager to acknowledge his skill. Derek himself waited by the exit, his son stable, transferred to paramedics, his face a mask of remorse as he extended a hand to Vincent. "I was wrong," he said simply, his voice low enough that only they could hear. "I let my ignorance speak for me, and you still saved my boy. Thank you." Vincent accepted the handshake, his grip firm, but his mind already drifting to the larger implications. The video someone had surely recorded, now circulating on social media, the way his carefully compartmentalized life was about to collide with the outside world. Ezekiel stood beside him, his arm brushing Vincent's in silent solidarity, the two of them navigating the crowd like they had navigated the flight together, a unit forged in quiet battles. Back in their Los Angeles apartment that evening, the city lights twinkling through the large windows, Vincent finally allowed himself to process the day, collapsing onto the couch with a sigh. "I keep thinking about what he said at the beginning," he admitted, his voice thick with the exhaustion that came from years of swallowing similar comments. Ezekiel sat next to him, pulling him close. "And I keep thinking about how you rose above it every single time," he replied, his fingers tracing patterns on Vincent's arm. "You didn't let his words define you. You just did what you do best, save a life." Their conversation drifted then to the deeper currents of their relationship, the way Vincent's family back in Texas had never fully accepted his coming out, the holiday visits that felt more like interrogations than celebrations. Vincent recalled the night 3 years earlier when he had first introduced Ezekiel to his parents, the tense dinner table, the forced smiles, the phone calls afterward where his father quoted Bible verses about sin and his mother cried about grandkids that might never come. Ezekiel had been the one to hold him through the tears, reminding him that love was not a negotiation. Yet the plane incident brought it all rushing back, the fear that public visibility would force choices Vincent was not ready to make. The next morning, the video was everywhere, local news picking it up with headlines about the heroic doctor on Flight 247, the comment section a mix of praise and the inevitable backlash from those who saw only the initial mockery. Vincent's phone buzzed with a text from his sister in Texas. "Did you see this?" she wrote, attaching the clip, followed by a hesitant, "Are you okay?" He stared at the screen, his thumb hovering, the internal conflict flaring again, the pull between the life he had built with Ezekiel and the family ties that still tugged at his heart. Ezekiel noticed the hesitation and sat down beside him at the breakfast table. "Whatever comes next, we face it together," he said, his voice steady, the promise they had made to each other countless times. But Vincent knew the cost was rising. The hospital board would want a statement, the media would dig for more, and his parents would demand explanations that reopened old wounds. As they drove to the hospital later that day, Vincent glanced at Ezekiel in the passenger seat, the man who had chosen him despite the complications, and felt a surge of gratitude mixed with a heavy awareness that every decision from here would carry weight. The respect from the plane was real, but it was only the beginning of a storm that would test everything they held dear. The hospital corridors felt longer than usual as Vincent walked his usual route, the familiar beep of monitors and scent of antiseptic grounding him after the whirlwind of the flight. Colleagues clapped him on the back, some pulling him aside to hear the full story, their admiration genuine, yet tinged with the undercurrent of curiosity about the personal details the video had hinted at. In the break room, a senior doctor named Marcus leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. "You handle that like a pro," he said, "but the board is already asking questions about public image, Vincent. You know how it is." Vincent nodded, forcing a smile, but inside the words landed like stones, the subtle reminder that his excellence in the ER did not erase the fact that he was gay in a field still navigating its own biases. Ezekiel waited for him at home that evening, their small balcony overlooking the hills, the sunset painting the sky in oranges and pinks as they shared a quiet dinner. "The video has over 1 million views now," Ezekiel said, scrolling through his phone, his brow furrowed at some of the comments. "Some people are calling Derek out, but others are saying things about us that make me wonder if we should lay low for a while." Vincent set down his fork, the food suddenly tasteless. "Laying low has been my default for years," he admitted, the confession heavy with years of half-truths to his family. "Remember when I told my dad I was seeing someone and he assumed it was a woman? I let him think that for months because it was easier." Ezekiel reached across the table, his hand covering Vincent's, the touch a lifeline. "And I never blamed you for that, but maybe this is the moment to stop hiding." The conversation stretched late into the night, unearthing memories of their first meeting at a charity gala where Vincent had been the keynote speaker on emergency cardiac care and Ezekiel had been there as a volunteer coordinator, their eyes meeting across the room in a spark that neither could ignore. They had built a life together in Los Angeles. Vincent rising through the ranks of the hospital, Ezekiel managing community programs that helped at-risk youth, the kind of work that gave him purpose after his own difficult coming out in a small Midwestern town. Yet the family pressure lingered. Vincent's mother, calling the next morning, her voice trembling over the line. "We saw the video, honey," she said, "and your father is upset. He says it's drawing attention to things we don't discuss." Vincent paced the living room, his free hand clenching at his side. "Mom, it's who I am," he replied, the words he had said 100 times, but never quite loud enough to break through. The call ended with her usual plea to think about the family legacy, the church, the community back home, and Vincent hung up, feeling the familiar ache of divided loyalties. Ezekiel listened from the doorway, his own face reflecting the shared pain. "We can't keep paying this price forever," he said softly. Vincent knew he was right, but the fear of losing the fragile threads to his family kept him awake that night, staring at the ceiling as the city hummed below. The respect from the plane passengers felt distant, now replaced by the grinding reality of daily life, where every choice carried the potential for more betrayal, more sacrifice. The following week brought the first real cracks in the facade Vincent had maintained at work. During a staff meeting, Marcus, the senior doctor who had seemed supportive earlier, pulled him aside afterward, his tone shifting. "The board saw the video, and they're concerned about the narrative, Vincent," he said, lowering his voice. "Some donors are conservative, and this whole gay angle might affect funding for the new cardiac wing." Vincent felt the floor tilt slightly, the words echoing the same prejudices he had faced on the plane, but now from people he respected. "I saved a child's life," he replied, his voice steady despite the rising anger. "Does that not count for something?" Marcus shrugged, his expression apologetic but firm. "It does, but optics matter. Consider keeping your personal life private for now." The conversation left Vincent reeling, his drive home filled with replayed scenarios, the what-ifs that haunted him since coming out, the fear that his career, the one thing that defined his worth outside his family, might slip away because of who he loved. Ezekiel met him at the door, sensing the tension immediately and pulling him into a hug that lasted longer than usual. They spent the evening on the couch talking through the betrayal, not just from Marcus, but from the system that still required silence. Ezekiel shared his own stories from his work with youth, the kids who came to him broken by similar family rejections, the ones he fought to protect. "You can't let them dim your light," he said, his eyes intense. Vincent nodded, but the doubt lingered, the moral tug of war between professional ambition and personal authenticity. The next day brought another blow, a call from his sister in Texas, her voice hesitant as she explained the family gathering plan for the holidays. "Dad wants you to come, but he says no +1, she said, the words hanging heavy. "It's not personal, Vin. He just thinks it would be easier." Vincent hung up his hands, shaking the exclusion, cutting deeper than any plain mockery. Ezekiel found him in the bedroom. Later, the two of them sitting on the edge of the bed, the silence filled with unspoken fears. "I don't know if I can keep choosing," he whispered, the confession raw. Choosing what? Ezekiel asked, though he already knew. Between them and the family, Vincent finished, the weight of the dilemma pressing down. They talked late, the decisions they had made over the years, the times Vincent had skipped family events to avoid conflict, the sacrifices Ezekiel had accepted without complaint. The relationship had been built on love, but also on compromises that now felt unsustainable. As the days passed, the media interest faded, but the internal storm grew, Vincent throwing himself into long shifts at the hospital, trying to outrun the questions, while Ezekiel quietly researched support groups for couples in similar situations. The respect from strangers on the plane had been fleeting, but the respect they owed each other, the kind forged in fire, was the foundation they refused to let crack. The invitation to his sister's wedding arrived in the mail, a thick cream envelope with elegant script that felt like a trap. Vincent opened it at the kitchen table, Ezekiel reading over his shoulder, the conditions clear in the handwritten note from his mother, no dates, no mentions of lifestyle, just come as the successful son they could proudly display. The words stung like fresh wounds, reopening the scars from years of conditional love. "I can't go without you," Vincent said, his voice breaking as he set the card down. Ezekiel pulled him close, his arms a steady circle. "Then don't go," he replied simply, but they both knew it was not that easy. The family ties, a web that entangled more than just holidays. The conversation turned to their shared history, the night Vincent had proposed in this very apartment, the ring simple but meaningful, the promise to build something real despite the world. Yet the pressure mounted with daily calls from Texas, his father leaving voicemails quoting scripture, his sister sending photos of the wedding preparations, each one a reminder of the life he was missing. At work, the tension escalated when a colleague leaked details of the plane incident to a conservative donor group, framing it as a publicity stunt, the resulting memo from the board suggesting Vincent take a leave to let things cool. The betrayal cut deep. The colleague someone Vincent had mentored now choosing career over loyalty. Ezekiel was there when he came home that night, the two of them sitting on a balcony, the city lights blurring through tears. "I feel like I'm losing pieces of myself," Vincent confessed, the internal conflict spilling out, the guilt over disappointing his parents, the fear of losing his job, the love for Ezekiel that remained the only constant. They talked through the night, weighing options, the possibility of a quiet life, the cost of silence, the price of truth. Ezekiel shared his own awakening the moment he had decided to live openly after losing a friend to suicide, the resolve that had drawn Vincent to him in the first place. As dawn broke, they made a tentative plan to attend the wedding together. No hiding, no compromises, the decision heavy but necessary. The days leading up to the trip were filled with preparation, Vincent rehearsing conversations in his mind, Ezekiel offering quiet encouragement, the bond between them strengthening, even as external forces pulled. The flight to Texas felt like stepping into the past, the same tension from the Chicago plane, now internalized, the knowledge that this visit would force choices long avoided. Upon arrival, the family home felt both familiar and foreign, the dinner table set for reconciliation but laced with unspoken rules. Vincent's father greeted them stiffly, his handshake brief, his eyes avoiding Ezekiel, the air thick with the same prejudice Derek had voiced weeks earlier. The evening unfolded in careful conversation, the wedding plans dominating until Vincent could no longer hold back. "I'm here with a man I love," he said, the words landing like stones in still water. The room fell silent, the moral dilemma laid bare, the choice between family approval and personal integrity, the price each side would pay now unavoidable. The wedding rehearsal dinner became the battlefield, Vincent's father pulling him aside in the church hall, his face flushed with anger. "This is not the place for your choices," he hissed, the words echoing the same condemnation Vincent had heard since college. "You bring shame on the family." Vincent stood his ground, the years of swallowing similar lectures rising in a wave of defiance. "Shame is what you make it, Dad," he replied, his voice low but firm. "Loving someone isn't a sin." Ezekiel waited outside the hall, his presence a silent support. When Vincent emerged, the two of them walking the quiet streets of the small Texas town, the stars overhead indifferent to the turmoil below. They talked about the sacrifices, the times Vincent had chosen family events over couple getaways, the promotions he had turned down to avoid scrutiny, the way love had required constant navigation of minefields. Back at the hotel room, the confrontation continued via phone with his mother, pleading for compromise, the moral conflict tearing at Vincent's core, the right choice feeling both clear and impossible. The next day at the wedding, the ceremony beautiful in its tradition, Vincent sat with Ezekiel in the back row, the whispers from relatives a low hum of judgment. During the reception, his sister pulled him aside, her eyes sad. "I want you here, Vin, but Dad is making it hard," she said, the family fracture visible in her hesitation. Vincent felt the weight of divided loyalties, the betrayal not just from outsiders, but from those closest, the trade-off between blood and chosen family. Ezekiel suggested they leave early, the drive back to the airport filled with reflection, the decision to return to Los Angeles without staying for the full festivities, a small rebellion with big consequences. Upon landing, the hospital called with news of the leaked memo, turning into a formal review, the colleague who had betrayed him now positioning for Vincent, spot the workplace prejudice mirroring the family one. Ezekiel supported him through the meetings, the late nights of strategy, the moments of doubt where Vincent questioned if the fight was worth the cost. Their relationship faced its own strain, a heated argument one evening over whether to go public with a statement, the word sharp but rooted in love. "You can't keep protecting everyone," Ezekiel said, his frustration breaking through. "Including me." Vincent pulled him close, the embrace a reminder of their foundation, the awakening beginning to take shape, the realization that true respect started from within. The days blurred into a cycle of calls from Texas, his father issuing an ultimatum, the sister caught in the middle, the internal storm reaching its peak as Vincent weighed the ultimate choice between reconciliation on their terms or standing firm on his own. The family meeting was arranged via video call, the screen dividing the living room in Los Angeles from the familiar kitchen in Texas. Vincent's father sat at the head of the table, his expression stern as he laid out the conditions: attendance at church, counseling, the expectation of discretion. Ezekiel sat beside Vincent, their hands linked, visible on camera, the deliberate act of visibility, a declaration. "This is who I am, Dad," Vincent said, the words steady, the years of internal conflict culminating in this moment. "I want change for anyone, not even you." The response was immediate, the father's voice rising, the accusations flying, the pain of rejection raw and unfiltered. "You are throwing away your heritage," he shouted, the moral divide stark, the right and wrong defined differently by each side. Vincent felt the sting, but also the release, the awakening that had been building since the plane, the understanding that his worth was not measured by approval. Ezekiel spoke then, his voice calm but powerful, sharing his own story of loss and resilience, the compassion that had drawn them together. The call ended in silence, the family ties strained to breaking, the sacrifice, clear, the price of authenticity paid in estranged relationships. In the days that followed, Vincent faced the hospital review, the board ultimately siding with his record, the colleague exposed for the betrayal, the workplace victory bittersweet. Ezekiel and Vincent took a weekend away to the coast, the ocean waves a backdrop to deep conversations, the trade-offs discussed, the growth acknowledged, the love reaffirmed. Yet the doubt lingered in quiet moments, Vincent wondering if he had been too harsh, the moral gray area of family versus self a constant companion. They returned to find a letter from his mother, a tentative olive branch, mixed with conditions, the cycle threatening to repeat. The confrontation with Derek resurfaced in a surprising way, a thank you note from the salesman now advocating for inclusion in his own company, the ripple effect of the plane incident extending beyond the cabin. Vincent and Ezekiel discussed forgiveness, the choice to extend grace without compromising boundaries, the psychological weight of letting go. As the weeks passed, the tension eased into a new normal, the relationship deeper for the trials, the internal conflicts resolved into clarity, the path forward one of honest living regardless of cost. The charity gala where Vincent was honored for his work in emergency medicine felt like a full circle, the same venue where he and Ezekiel had met years earlier. He stood at the podium, the audience a mix of colleagues, supporters, and a few family members who had chosen to attend, his sister, among them, her quiet smile a bridge across the divide. In his speech, he spoke not just of medicine but of the human connections that sustained it, the respect earned through actions, not appearances, the journey from the plain mockery to this moment of recognition. Ezekiel watched from the front row, his eyes shining with pride, the romantic bond that had weathered every storm now stronger. Afterward, they stepped outside, the Los Angeles night warm around them, the city alive with possibility. The family wounds remained, but healing had begun on their terms, the sacrifices acknowledged, the awakening complete. Vincent turned to Ezekiel, the man who had stood by him through it all. "Thank you for reminding me who I am," he said, the words simple but profound. They embraced there under the lights, the moment echoing the one on the plane, but transformed by time and trial. The road ahead held more challenges, the societal prejudices persistent, the moral choices ongoing, but they faced them together, the price paid now an investment in a life fully lived. In the end, was prioritizing love and authenticity over unconditional family acceptance the right choice for Vincent despite the pain and loss, or should he have compromised for the sake of reconciliation? And what would you choose if the same conflict stood before you?